for any of you who've not been to one of our book review sessions before, we tend to run on the same sorts of grounds as we do anything where we have contributions from members. That is, it's spontaneous. There's no running order, so we will sit and be quiet for a few moments before we begin, and then anyone who feels moved to come up here to the lectern and tell us about what they've been reading, please just get up and come up here and read and talk. If you want to have any questions, I have got the lapel mic we could pass around, or if that's not going to work, we get squeaking from the main speakers. If there is a question and the person up here has heard it and nobody else has, if the person here can repeat the question, then everybody knows what we're talking about. Okay? So welcome everybody, and thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Well, I better start because I didn't know it. I thought it was poetry, so I brought 3 poetry.
So, reading.
Oh, I see. So, right, okay. So. I was no tree walking. I was still. They ignored me, the birds, the migrants on their way south. They relief the trees, budding them with their notes. They filter through the boughs like sunlight, looked at me from 3 feet off, their eyes blackberry bright, not seeing me, not detaching me from the withers, where I was caged, and they free. They would have perched on me, had I nourishment in my fissures. As it was, they netted me in their shadows, brushed me with a sound, feathering the arrows of their own bows, and were gone, leaving me to reflect on the answer to a question that I had not asked. A repetition in time of the eternal I am. Say it. Don't be shy. Escape from your mortal cage in thought. Your migrations will never be over. Between 2 truths, there's only the mind to fly with. Navigate by such stars as are not leaves falling from life's deciduous tree, but spray from the fountain of imagination, endlessly replenishing itself out of its own waters. Any guesses? Great. R.S. Thomas, for a poem, A Thicket Inclined. Shall I read the other one? Might as well. I don't know where prayers go, or what they do. Do cats pray while they sleep, half asleep in the sun? Does the opossum pray as it crosses the street? The sunflowers? The old black oak growing older every year? I know I can walk through the world along the shore or under the trees with my mind filled with things of little importance, in full self-attendance. A condition I can't really call being alive. Is prayer a gift? Or a petition? What does it matter? The sunflowers blaze. Maybe that's their way. Maybe cats are sound asleep. Maybe not. While I was thinking this, I happened to be standing just outside my door with my notebook open, which is the way I begin every morning. Then a wren in the privet began to sing. He was positively drenched in enthusiasm. I don't know why. And yet, why not? I wouldn't persuade you from whatever you believe or whatever you don't. That's your business. But I thought of the wren singing. What could this be if it wasn't a prayer? So I just listened. My pen in the air. Anybody? Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver. I think she died just recently. She's an American poet.
Her words live on.
Her words live on. And then finally, one you've heard before, I think. Begin the song exactly where you are. Remain within the world of which you are made. Call nothing common in the earth or air. Accept it all and let it be for good. Start with the very breath you breathe in now, this moment's pulse, this rhythm in your blood. And listen to it, ringing soft and low. Stay with the music. Words will come in time. Slow down your breathing. Keep it deep and slow. Become an open singing bowl, whose chime is richness rising out of emptiness, and timelessness resounding into time. And when the heart is full of quietness, begin the song exactly where you are. Anybody? It's one of my favourites. Malcolm Guite, who was lecturer in theology and chaplain at at Girton College, and is a performance poet, singer-songwriter, rider of Harley Davidson, and if you look on YouTube, is the original hairy biker. He has a beard not quite as good as William's. Who is there?
I bought this book earlier this year when I was going to Amazon and I just stumbled on it. And it's written by an Indian holy man who was born in 1885 and died in the 1950s. He was a prolific writer. He actually achieved enlightenment in his lifetime. And he wrote this for his disciples and students as to how to achieve it. And basically it's about concentrating on the thoughts that come up and trying to ask yourself, who do they come from? And as we sit quietly, we're always getting thoughts come into our mind, and it sounded to me like part of Eugene's work. Anyway, I'll just read some extracts from it.
What's the book called, please?
It's called Be As You Are, the teaching of Sri Ramana Maharshi. And he says all you have to do is be as you are, but be aware of what you are and the thoughts that are coming up constantly. So he says if you shine the light of awareness on the ego, it will disappear if you're constantly shining the light on it. And he says, he gives a comparison with the ego and awareness. In Hindu marriage functions, the feasts often continue for 5 or 6 days. On one of these occasions, a stranger was mistaken for the best man by the bride's party, and they therefore treated him with special regard. Seeing him treated with special regard by the bride's party, the bridegroom's party considered him to be some man of importance and gave him special respect. The stranger had altogether a happy time of it. He was also all along aware of the real situation. On one occasion, the groom's party wanted to refer to him on some point, and so they asked the bride's party about him. Immediately he scented trouble and made himself scarce. So it is with the ego. If looked for, it disappears. If not, it continues to give trouble. So Maharishi gives essentially what he recommends to be aware. And I found as I'm sitting quietly, I'm constantly getting these thoughts coming up. And he says you should make use of that information. And so this is like a question and answer right throughout the book. So the questioner puts to him, how should a beginner start this practice? And Maharishi replies, the mind will subside only by means of the inquiry, who am I? The thought, who am I? Destroying all other thoughts will itself finally be destroyed like the stick used for stirring the funeral pyre. If other thoughts rise, one should, without attempting to complete them, inquire, to whom did they arise? What does it matter how many thoughts arise? At the very moment that each thought arises, if one vigilantly inquires, to whom did this arise, it will be known to me. If then one inquires, who am I? The mind will turn back to its source, the self, and the thought which had arisen will also subside. By repeatedly practicing thus, the power of the mind to abide in its source increases. So he says you're constantly doing that over and over, every minute of the day. I've tried to do it actually. I'm amazed at how much comes up. And then he gives further on, I thought this was interesting, a questioner puts to him, how is one to know the self? And Maharishi replies, and what he actually says is the self is unquantifiable, it's unknowable, you can't objectivize it, you just experience it. That's what he's saying. Knowing the self means being the self. Can you say that you do not know the self? Though you cannot see your own eyes, and though not provided with a mirror to look in, do you deny the existence of your eyes? Similarly, you're aware of the self even though the self is not objectified. Or do you deny yourself because it is not objectified? When you say, I cannot know the self, it means absence in terms of relative knowledge, because you have been so accustomed to relative knowledge that you identify yourself with it. Such wrong identity has caused the difficulty of not knowing the obvious self, because it cannot be objectified. And then you ask, how is one to know the self? And then it continues with another question. You talk of being. Being what? And he answers, your duty is to be, and not to be this or that. I am that I am sums up the whole truth. The method is summed up in the words, be still. What does stillness mean? It means destroy your egoic mind, because any form or shape is the cause of trouble. Give up the notion that I am so and so. All that is required to realize the self is to be still. What can be easier than that? Hence, self-knowledge is the easiest to attain. The truth of oneself alone is worthy to be scrutinized and known. Taking it as the target of one's attention, one should keenly know it in the heart. This knowledge of oneself will be revealed only to the conscious, which is silent, clear and free from the activity of the agitated and suffering mind. Know that the consciousness which always shines in the heart as the formless self, I, alone is perfect reality. This I is known by one's being still, without thinking about anything as existent or non-existent. Anyway, I've been through this book a few times, and I've identified a large number of parts of my ego which keep on coming up. I can identify them. I've got the all-conquering hero, the great scientist, the wise sage, and then the little rebel of a child, if it's not included, wants to blow up the entire thing. So he invites you to identify your ego parts. And I've found that as soon as a notion comes up, and it would normally run for some time, if I catch it early enough, it drops like a stone. I don't continue with it. Anyway, a good read. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just wanted to jump up and talk about this because a lot of that reminded me of a lot of this. So I brought a couple of books. I wasn't really sure what the kind of setup here is, but so this is a book called Reality, which is a fairly audacious title to start with, by Peter Kingsley, and it's about the Greek philosopher Epimenides, who I knew very little about. He lived in the 6th or 7th century BC, so about 150 years before Socrates, and he's regarded to be the father of logic, the person who said, you know, there can be two types of knowledge: empirical knowledge, which we can't always be sure about, and logical knowledge, which we kind of work out inside our heads, which we can be sure about. This book basically sets out to entirely destroy that idea and says, no, that's not what he was saying at all. It's completely the opposite. Epimenides was a priest of Apollo, and he was kind of, there's evidence that he kind of came from an Asiatic shamanic tradition, and all we have that survives of his work are some fragments of a poem which these kind of conclusions have been drawn from. So Peter Kingsley, the author of this book, examines this poem in minute detail and makes a lot of reference back to Homer, with whom Epimenides would have been very familiar, and the general populace at the time would have been. And he says, look, when he uses this word, it doesn't mean that. It means, look, it's referring back to all these bits of Homer's work, which, so, you know, you have to take it in context. So I'll just read a couple of bits from this just to give a sort of sense of it, but that's the general flow. I'll read the first chapter. But another really nice thing about it is they're very short chapters. I was really kind of a bit put off by the size of the book and the weighty, like, it sounds like... Yes, but it's beautifully written. They're short, succinct sentences, and it gives you a lot to think about, but it's very easy just to sort of get through it. So the first chapter is, again, it starts pretty portentously. I had better write these things down before they are lost for another 2,000 years. Please don't get me wrong. What I have to say is everywhere. In the air we breathe, each falling leaf, in every single object we see. But to make it conscious, to snap out of the fairy tale spell we live under, that's another matter. This will make a strange story. Strange because it's the story behind the story of our lives. If it was about anything else, if it was simply about things that once might have happened long ago, then we would be free to go on forgetting. But it's not, so it won't leave you alone or give you any peace. So often we try to convince ourselves we are living a full, contented life, but there is always something pulling at our heart. Ambition, restlessness are just its shadows, and it will go on tearing at our hearts until we start to acknowledge what is missing. Perhaps this is a story you will be tempted to believe. Let me warn you gently, though, that if you do, you will find yourself losing a hold on your other beliefs. The stakes are high. You might feel inclined to suppose that there is some kind of halfway house where you can have things both ways, but believe me, I can tell you from experience, there is none. If you want to keep a grip on what you think you already know, you will have to dismiss what I say. Either way, it makes no real difference to me. My job is just to tell the tale, that's all. And besides, there are some things that, once they are said, there is no unsaying them. They are written in stone. And the writing on the stone is about you, and you are the stone. So that's the first chapter. And then, just very briefly, to say it once again, Parmenides' poem is a sacred text, and if we want to glimpse the extraordinary reality he's pointing us to, all we have to do is this. Go to the window and look outside. Look at the sky and the trees and listen. All the intellectual and mystical journeys end here, where they began. For in spite of our blindness and deafness, we are surrounded at every moment by completeness.
It did say on the website that it could be something other than a book, but actually, having heard the first statements about reality and how we deal with it, this is about a book which covers what's been said already, The Lord Arthur by Thomas Mallory. The Lord Arthur. It's the story of King Arthur. It's a book, it's a great book of our nation. It's a complex book. How many of you have read it? It is a good read, isn't it? But it's a complex read. Many here will know that I gave a talk on this on the Holy Grail story. But how I came to this book is that, I'll tell you, it's about these pictures. You just hold up that. These are paintings by a French artist called Louis Keller, who, through circumstances, became close to me. And you'll see in this painting that this is about hairstyles, actually, of the period. But you can see that in all his paintings, he has a duality. Maybe you can see it in there. If you take the other painting, please, Martin. Yeah? Oh, thank you. Can you manage that? Right. In his method with oil paintings was that he would take a painting on china clay, and then he would engrave through the paintings to create, if you like, what he called extrinsic and intrinsic reality. But what he painted about, and certainly in this period, was the legend of Lord Arthur. And it was through this painter that I got to know about the Grail story. Thank you, Professor. And thank you very much. Super. And we talked about ways of being sensitive. And the quest for the Holy Grail in the Arthurian story is about that. About the two sides of our being, not fighting each other, but opposing each other consciously. And I'm just going to read this small bit from the story. And so they entered and made great reverence thereto. And Sir Galahad fell on his knees and prayed a long time to our Lord. that at what time, he asked, he might pass out of this world. And so long he prayed, till a voice said, Sir Galahad, thou shalt have thy request, and when thou askest the death of the body, thou shalt have it, and then shalt thou have the soul, the life of thy soul. And so he laid him down and slept a great while. And when he awakened, he looked afore him, and he saw the city of Sarras. Now in the city of Sarras lies the whole key to the Galahad's quest for the Holy Grail. The word Sarras is a palindrome. It reads the same backwards. And it's the eternal statement made by Medley, which says, as above, so below. Sarras is the redeemed city. And it's these two opposing forces of time and eternity. And Eugene, and all mystics know that those opposing forces don't fight each other, but they press gently against each other. And in that pressing, you do lose ego, because you're not on one side or the other. You're not a Brexiteer or a Remainer. You hold them together as different possibilities and realities. And that's the message from this story for today. Thank you.
I was just told to bring a book which had an impact on my life, and I wrote 2 books. And the first book is actually very funny because it was given to me by Anthony Duckworth. And I then wrote to Eugene. I thought, because of that book, I brought Anthony to Eugene, who was anyhow, this is a little book which is totally ancient. It's absolutely ancient. And it's from a Swami who completely unknown. He didn't want to be known because it was his pupil who wrote the book. And when you read the book, you see things quite differently, and it makes an impact on your thinking and everything. And that's why I could understand Eugene much better than if I hadn't read that book. Yes. And the other one, which made an impact, which later on a lot of people, is when Jesus lived in India, and that he didn't die on the cross and so on. That makes you rethink your faith and say, well, does it matter? What he taught us is what matters. So that was also a book which had an impact on me.
Could you hold that up, Kirsty? Could you hold that one up so that we can see what's in the book? Hold them up and flip them around.
Yeah, but there is nothing there. I have to.
Could I just ask that everyone who's brought a book with them, if they could let us know what they are, or a poem. You can either write it down on the back of the sheet where you signed in, or you could email it to info@PH Association.
I will just tell
Yeah.
you. One is an advanced course in yoga philosophy and Oriental occultism. And the other one is Jesus Lived in India by a German theologist, Walter Kersten, but it's written in English. You can read it in English first and put it in German.
This is maybe looking for the same sort of themes we've already heard from a more temporal point of view. I brought a book that's called The Warmth of the Heart Prevents Your Body from Rusting. And it's about aging without growing old. And I'm looking around in this room and I'm thinking, well, nobody's in their 20s anymore, so maybe this would be something to read. And I've decided to do that. I'm reading a bit for a chapter called Accepting Growing Old. And it's by Marie de Henzel, who is a French psychologist and psychotherapist. and she has been doing a lot of work in the palliative care field in France for the Ministry of Health. And she's written quite a lot of books about health and about growing old. So this chapter, as I say, is called Accepting Growing Old. There is a beneficial kind of depression that marks this essential stage of life, required in order for us to mature and move on to something new. As with any grieving process, one experiences a state of sadness and withdrawal, but there's nothing pathological about this. It is a process of internalization required to allow us to draw the bright, living powers of the soul from deep within ourselves. For desire is still there. Our life's energy pushes us ever forward, continuing to seek that which is new, and this process continues right up to the last day of our lives. Carl Jung conceived a model that can help us to understand the progression into old age. In the first half of his life, the individual must assert himself, construct himself, and realize his ambitions. Generally, he does this in ignorance of that which constructs him, that is, his most inner being, and he sometimes works to the detriment of his personal freedom. We then see that as he enters his third or fourth stage of life, as he bids the inevitable farewell to his youth, his physical powers, his role in society, and his performance at work, he may discover a new freedom and inner life for himself. These new resources facilitate growth and transformation. Certainly, everyone changes and matures throughout life, but the transformation which accompanies the final stretch of years is a form of completion. As Michel de Moussin said, it is a question of putting oneself completely into the world before passing away. This process may take several decades or only a few days. Self-completion means realizing one's true nature, allowing one's self, one's essential being to manifest itself. Above all, it is a work of awareness. The second half of life has a spiritual goal. It is characterized by the process of individuation, during which the me, which one could also call the external man, is sacrificed to the self, the inner man. It is in fact the me, the ego, the external man, which experiences this descent, while the self, on the other hand, continues to progress. Only old people who experience this transformation can understand St. Paul's words to the Corinthians. While our outer man is wasting away, our inner man is renewed day by day. When we say that old age is not a shipwreck, but is instead a form of growth, we clearly are not referring to something that happens in the outside world, but to an inner ripening. The true meaning of old age is not performance, but maturity. Many people live according to external constraints and maintain a false self. That is to say, a personality built on compromises that sometimes run counter to the true personality of the individual. They try to live through the afternoon of life according to the morning rules, thus running the risk that they will spend the last years of their existence desperately clinging to old patterns and outmoded thinking. They become a rigid caricature of what they used to be. We can easily understand the ontological and spiritual meaning of the inevitable depression that accompanies the aging process. It teaches us humility and wisdom. As in St. John of the Cross's dark night of the soul, we are witnessing the death of the egotistical part of ourselves. The outer person is damaged. It hurts, it is unacceptable, and is humiliating. Our souls are shaken by trembling and pangs of anxiety. We have a right to this depression, writes Hermann Hesse. It seems to me that we then have the right to feel and remain small in the face of this, like children who use tears and weakness to regain their equilibrium after a disturbing incident. Once we have made it through the depression, A hitherto unsuspected strength will manifest itself. For though biological aging may be unstoppable and the body continues to change, the inner person is neither damaged nor is it concerned by growing old. She continues to evolve, to progress. But in order to accomplish this, we must accept and subscribe to reality. No further compromises is possible between what we would like to be and experience and what existence has given us. It takes a lot of courage and clear thinking to get there.
The book I'd like to share today is by Rachel Carson, and it's called Under the Sea Wind. If a book can transport me not only to another place and another time, but also enable me to hear new sounds, to experience new smells and tastes, feel new fears, if a writer is able to transport me to another world, they gain my utmost respect. These writers have a gift. Rachel Carson is just such a writer. Largely remembered for her 1962 publication, Silent Spring. In fact, 20 years previously, Rachel had written 3 hauntingly evocative books about the sea and its creatures. The first of these, Under the Sea Wind, first published in 1941, was overshadowed by the outbreak of World War II and was a commercial failure. Rachel never gave up on it though, and it was republished to great acclaim in 1952. In this book, she wrote of what life on and under the sea was like for 3 different creatures. Inspired by her love of the natural world, she turned her years of zoological study into memorable prose that anyone could appreciate. Under the Sea Wind describes life in or around the Atlantic, off New England shores, as lived by 3 creatures: birds, sanderlings, like large sandpipers, a young mackerel, whom she named Scomber, which is actually the scientific name for a mackerel, and anguilla, a female eel, again a scientific name for the eel. The experiences of these creatures kept me fascinated, as anybody who knows me can appreciate. With me it's either history or natural history. Their individual journeys through life, perilous. The book left me pondering the interrelationships of marine life, the form in which each creature enters this world, how each develops, how each survives, and it left me thinking long after I put the book down. Throughout Rachel Carson's life, Under the Sea Wind remained her favourite book. Rachel was born in 1907 on a farm near Springdale, Pennsylvania. An avid reader, she began writing stories, often involving animals, aged 8, and she had her first story published aged 10. Growing up, she favoured books featuring the natural world, particularly the ocean, and finished top of her class at high school. She gained a master's in zoology from Pennsylvania College for Women, now Chatham University, and in 1932 was forced to abandon her studies for a doctorate for financial reasons. She subsequently became only the second woman to be employed by the United States Bureau of Fisheries, where she was tasked with generating public interest in fish biology. To fulfill this task, she wrote several series of radio programs entitled Romance Under the Waters. Despite the title, the writing is not sentimental. Her books are informative and highly evocative. Rachel was then directed by her employers to analyse and report data on fish populations, and out of that assignment grew 3 beautiful books. Under the Sea Wind, this one, followed by The Edge of the Sea, and finally The Sea Around Us completes the trilogy. Speaking in 1952 of the first of these, she wrote, "If there is poetry in my book about the sea, it's not because I deliberately put it there, but because nobody could write truthfully about the sea and leave out the poetry." In Under the Sea Wind, Rachel allots each of its creatures their own book, following their progress from birth through youth, growth, maturity, to eventually moving over or under the sea, exploring new vistas, and for me, imparting information I feel privileged to share. The unfamiliar creatures are covered in an excellent 35-page glossary that includes behavioural information as well as physical description. Earlier I mentioned Rachel Carson's probably most well-known book, Silent Spring, referring to life after insecticides and pesticides without birdsong. It was in 1945 that Rachel first tackled the subject of DDT that was only just then beginning to undergo tests for safety and ecological effects. She recognised the balance of nature and warned that any species subject to chemicals would develop an immunity. She wrote then, "The chemical war is never won, and all life is caught in the violent crossfire." It was only while searching the internet very recently that I realised what a massive figure she was and still is in conservation, and how many honours have been bestowed on her, most of them posthumously. The homestead where she was born has been entered on the National Register of Historic Places. There's a Rachel Carson Bridge in Pittsburgh. There's a statue of her at Woods Hole, Pennsylvania. 3 research vessels bear her name in and around Florida. After her death, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. There are numerous events, awards, prizes bearing her name. Presidents honoured her by naming buildings, bridges, ships, colleges, schools, marine institutions, awards for ecology, postage stamps, including Reagan, Clinton, Johnson and Bush. But perhaps her greatest influence of all was on a neighbour of hers. For many years, Rachel lived on Cape Cod and drew inspiration from the coast and its inhabitants. Nearby, John F. Kennedy's bookshelf in Hyannisport held 2 treasured books, 2 from this trilogy. Aware of the balance of nature around the coast, even as a senator, Kennedy tried to keep that shoreline clear of industrialisation. Early, after the publication of Silent Spring, at Kennedy's request, Rachel addressed a White House conference on conservation. Shortly afterwards, Jackie Kennedy invited her to join the Women's Committee for New Frontiers, a brains trust of the smartest women to try and save very early efforts to save the planet from insecticides and pesticides. One journalist subsequently wrote, "Kennedy loved marine conservation, and Carson was his muse." She died of cancer in 1964. I'll just read one short paragraph. In the surface waters, Scomber first knew the fear of the hunted. On the 10th morning of his life, he lingered in the upper fathoms of water, instead of following down into the soft blue below. Out of the clear green water, a dozen gleaming silver fishes
suddenly loomed up. They were anchovies, small and herring-like. The foremost anchovy caught sight of Scomba. Swerving from his path, he came whirling through the yard of water that separated them, open-mouthed, ready to seize the small mackerel. Scomba veered away in sudden alarm, but his powers of motion were newfound, and he rolled clumsily in the water. In a fraction of a second he would have been seized and eaten, but a second anchovy, darting in from the opposite side, collided with the first, and in the confusion, Scomba dashed beneath them. Only one side to where most of us are vegetarian.
This is a book called Elegant Simplicity, and it's by Satish Kumar. I know some of you know of Satish Kumar, but just to introduce him, he was born in Pakistan, and his father died when he was only 4, and he was living with a grieving mother who tried not to show her grief, whereas he was grieving openly. He met a Jain monk who said if he joined the Jain order he could be free of his sadness. So he became a Jain monk at the age of 9, and at the age of 18, as a teenager, as a Jain he was not supposed to read books other than those prescribed by the community, but somebody gave him a book by Mahatma Gandhi on peace activism. And to cut a long story short, Satish came out of the Jain order to look at what he could do towards peace activism. And within a few years he'd started a marathon walk of 2,500 miles from Pakistan to Moscow, to Paris, to London and to Washington on a message of peace. And he delivered to each of the world nuclear leaders at that time a packet of tea, saying, before you press the button, drink tea. But he settled eventually in North Devon, and he's become a great educationalist in this country. He started the Schumacher School in Dartington, and he also started a small school in his own village, initially for his own children and those of the village, and that has recently closed and the school building is being developed into an eco-centre for education. But Elegant Simplicity is his latest book. It came out in January. And he doesn't actually define his terms, elegant and simplicity. But since we're Eugene Halliday scholars, we have to define our terms first. So one moment, please. Elegant comes from eligere, which means to choose and to select. So it comes to mean beauty, effectiveness and simplicity. And simplicity, I'm sure most of you know, means without folds. The plique of it means a fold, so like complicated is with folds. But simplicity is without folds. I think it's a lovely word. So the writing in this book is simple. Satish writes very easily, very easy reading. And his life he describes as the life of a pilgrim. His marathon walk was done without any money, without carrying any possessions, and he relied on the good nature of those who he met to look after him on his journey. Quite an exercise. He's done many pilgrimages since then, around England and across Europe. So just a couple of short paragraphs from his book. He says, elegant simplicity is a spiritual path, as well as a practical way of life. It's the harbinger of harmony and sustainer of the social fabric. Elegant simplicity preserves natural habitats, as well as protects cultures and communities. Elegant simplicity is as good for the outer landscape of the ecosphere as it is good for the inner landscape of the soul. The way to sustainability is simplicity. No amount of technological innovation will be enough. We have to simplify our homes, our workplaces and our lives, That is the way to create a sustainable world, both now and forever. Simplicity is also the way to spirituality. No number of temples, churches, mosques and holy books will be of any help unless we think simply and free ourselves from the burdens of fear, anger, ego and greed. With outer and inner simplicity, we can live a life of environmental stability, spiritual fulfillment and social justice. Elegant simplicity is as much a worldview as it is a lifestyle. There is a chapter in this book called Elegant Simplicity, in which he looks very practically at ways of living. Simplicity, he says, is a mindful way of living. And just to pick out a couple of bits, material simplicity does not mean poverty. Living simply and without clutter does not mean that we should not have a comfortable life. There is an innate elegance in minimizing possessions and maximizing comfort. Clutter brings chaos. Simplicity brings clarity. Simplicity is the voluntary acceptance of limits. Where there is simplicity, there is authenticity. Simple clothes are the clothes which keep you warm or keep you cold according to the system, according to the season. When you buy clothes because of a designer label, you lose simplicity, and so on. And it doesn't have a lot that's good to say about supermarkets. You go in for 2 things and end up buying 10. If we go to a simple shop or a farmer's market, where there is no plastic, no labels, no logos, no advertising, where things are simple, then we bring home the food that we need and we can prepare it with love, care and attention. Such food tastes delicious and is healthy, and digestion is easy. So it's a nice book to read. I might say that my garage at the moment is absolutely full of boxes, now divided into 2 halves, one of which will go to charity and the other half might eventually sell. It's been quite a long 6 months this, but unless before I started reading Satish Kumar, so very interesting. Just a bit more about Satish. The book he wrote before this, he called Soil, Soul and Society. And he compares that trinity of words with the trinity of words used in other systems from the French Revolutions, freedom, equality and brotherhood, to the American dream of independence, of life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. But all these leave out social interactions and our interaction with the planet. And he suggests that to think of soil, soul and society as a trinity gives us a different feeling, in that soil, the Latin word for soil is humus, which also gives rise to the word human. And we have to care for the soil and feed it for all the nutrients that we take out of it. Soul refers not just to the soul of man, but to the soul of mankind generally, and the soul of the planet. And society, of course, is to do with our total interactions together on all levels, material, physical, mental, spiritual, and he also talks about politics and economics, but I won't go into that today. So a nice book if you want to, a nice bedtime reading.
My book is called My Country Book. It's the first book I ever bought. A whole shilling it cost me at a Brigham buy sale. It was only published in 1942, and I bought it in 1943. And whoever let this book go, thank you very much, because it has given me great pleasure. Spending my whole shilling, which was all I had, on a book was a bit. Didn't you buy anything else? Because with a whole shilling in 1943, you could buy quite a lot. Those were the days when a loaf was a penny. But it's a wonderful book. I always have it in my own bookshelf where I know exactly where it is, because I have so many books I don't know exactly where every other book is. But this one I do know. It was written by an artist called Tony Cliff, which some of you will know. He was an extremely wonderful portrayer of very simple things in a few strokes. And one of the, I don't know whether you can see this, but it's a raging bull. And it is so easy to see people in this kind of situation. And I had a schoolboy once whose parents asked me would I help with him because he was having difficulty. And he really was having difficulty. But I discovered that he was born under the sign of Taurus. I showed him this picture and he stopped and he completely calmed down. And he said, "Can I have a copy of it, please?" So he's now a grown man. And he greets me in the street with a hug. But it's given me great pleasure, and I shall read it again and again. And this man has such wonderful talent. All parts of his skills, including a most wonderful woodcut. I don't know whether you can see that, but I will leave it open on the desk at the back. It is a lovely book. It'll be well out of print by now, but it's all about a farm on the Cheshire Plain, so it's fairly local to us, and I can relate to this at any time, in any situation. Thank you.
My choice, I didn't know what to choose. I didn't know what sort of thing to be choosing, so I just picked the book that I've read most recently and enjoyed. I reread The Great Gatsby because I was going to the ballet, the Bourne Ballet, at the Lowry, and I thought I'd better know the story a bit better. And I already knew the story, but because I knew I was going to the ballet, I think I read it with a bit more, mine was working a bit better on the second reading. Few notes. The Great Gatsby, the name itself, it sounds like one of those Victorian showmen, an illusionist perhaps, not his own name. He creates an illusion of himself, mysterious, dangerous perhaps. Fabulously wealthy, he flashes his wealth and shares it out through lavish parties. The truth was, this is a quote from the introduction to this book, the truth was that J. Gatsby of West Egg, Long Island, sprang from his platonic conception of himself. The character himself, Gatsby, to me, he harks back to myth, to Icarus and Midas. He's like a character in a fairy tale or a morality tale. He's presented as a chivalrous hero whose shining armour takes the form of expensive suits, whose trusty steed is his expensive automobile. One suggestion I read was that he represented America itself at the time, which I find really interesting, because if his downfall mirrors the coming on of the Depression in the 30s, it's prophetic, because the book was written in 1925. So I find that quite interesting. Nick is the narrator of the story, and he's part of the illusion too. How far can we trust what he says? He's just one of the characters in the story. Is he as untrustworthy as Gatsby himself? Many of the characters' names lead us sort of subconsciously, I think, to think something about what they're made up of. Nick himself. Old Nick, maybe? I don't know. Daisy Faye, the girl Gatsby is in love with. Is she fresh as a daisy? Is she slightly Faye? We don't know. The sinister guy in the book is Wolfsheim. Wolf, the big bad wolf. You know. All the characters at one of his parties have the name of plants or animals, removing them from the real world. Some of the set pieces are straight from the movies. I don't know when colour came into movies, but there's plenty of colour in this. It feels very Hollywood. It's oozing with glamour and it's spectacularly lit. Often he describes light that flickers, like the flicker of a movie camera. The book is beautifully constructed with themes weaving in and out, holding the whole thing together. There's past and present, war and peace, class and racial issues. The East, the American East, with all its opportunities, and the West, where many of the characters in the story have come from. Europe and America. Gatsby himself, let's drop that he's been to Oxford. He's not studied at Oxford, I don't know what circumstances he's been to Oxford, but he calls everybody old sport all the time. He's got this gloss of, it's like an ego that's poured over him. As well as telling the story of a glamorous individual, Fitzgerald is addressing the fate of American ideals during a period when the hopes and aspirations expressed in the Declaration of Independence back in 1776 were being put under pressure or distorted by the materialism, consumerism and violent rivalry of the early 20th century. It feels quite modern. I'm going to quote a little bit from the ballet, because when I went to see the ballet, I was interested in whether they really picked up on the themes and symbols and whatnot. This is the house. We walked through a high hallway into a bright rose-coloured space, fragilely bound into the house by French windows at either end. The windows were ajar and gleaming white against the fresh grass outside that seemed to grow a little way into the house. A breeze blew through the room. Blue curtains in at one end and out to the other like pale flags, twisting them up towards the frosted wedding cake of the ceiling, and then rippled over the wine-coloured rug, making a shadow on it as wind does on the sea. The only completely stationary object in the room was an enormous couch on which two young women were buoyed up as though upon an anchored balloon. They were both in white, and their dresses were rippling and fluttering as if they'd been blown back in after a short flight around the room. I was really pleased at the opening of the ballet because they had the curtain at the back was like a royal, and it was just... Did anybody else see the ballet? No, but it was absolutely spot on. The ballet itself didn't get a wonderful write-up, but I thought it was really good. Why do I like this book so much? It's like a TARDIS. It's only a little tiny book, but when you get inside it, it opens up. I like its neatness. I like its structure. I like the symbolism and the imagery. I like the fact that it's like a little poem. I like the fact that it keeps the reader on their toes. Can I trust this narrator? Is he as imperfect? And is he affected by the culture that surrounds him just as they are? I like the fairy tale quality of it, the way it harks back to an older genre while describing something so modern. I like the cinematic quality. I can see the event and watch them as on a screen. I like the fact that it seems so relevant today. Fitzgerald wrote that he wanted to write something new, something extraordinary and beautiful and simple and intricately patterned. And I think he did.
born to be. It's interesting to think that we're all born to be something, born to do something. Anyway, it's not easy when you're dyslexic to give one's own expression. But in my retirement speech years ago, I mentioned that I look forward to taking off the ICI or AstraZeneca persona I have become and discovering who I really am. That same year, at the top of Eagle Mountain in Vancouver, in the words of a very powerful song sung by Long John Baldry, I found my mantra. When you become who you have always been, your spirit soars and you fly like an eagle. 25 years later on, one of my sons, Stephen Conley, a values-based financial advisor, founder of the Academy of Life Planning and Transparency Task Force ambassador, now gives talks and advice on who you truly are born to be. Last week, Steve's first book was produced and it's on Amazon, and it's entitled Your Money or Your Life. It is about how you can plan the life you would love to have and then look at your finances and your assets and plan how you can achieve this. Not thinking about finance first as the banks do. I and my son are so enthusiastic about this. Myself, I just love that all people are now being encouraged to take charge of their own lives, take back their power to lead happy and fulfilling lives. Of course, at our age, I believe most people here are leading a happy and fulfilling life, but it is so encouraging to believe in the change that is happening. The young people are bringing this to the world. Thank you.
The book I've chosen is called The Master and His Emissary. I'll explain the title later on. But I do know that somebody else has read this in this group today. So I hope I do justice to this really. I read this book a few years ago, so it didn't really all that fresh to me, but it did have an impact, that's why I chose it. And when I look back, it still has that sort of feeling as well. I found it in an indirect way by going to a talk at the cathedral by a lady called Maggie Ross, a recluse. And she gave a talk, Behold, Not the Cloud of Experience, Some Thoughts on Mystical Theology. But it was during this, through hers I came across this book. And I bet you want to know all about it, don't you? But the subtitle is The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. I'm not an expert on biology, brains, or anything like that, so I have to accept what this person has read, and he did convince me in what he wrote. As you can see, it's a thick book, so I'm not going to talk all about it, but I'll just give a resume what it's about. It's really about the two hemispheres in the brain. That's the basis of it, I suppose, really. The book's divided into two parts. The first part is the divided brain, and he does a lot of explanation on research, study, and what is found about the brain. But it's the two things that he came across on the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And it's the difference is not what they do, but how they do it. The right hemisphere is really contextualizing, it's looking outwards and more outward looking, whereas the left hemisphere is doing all the processing, or just look at detail. And that's what the
he came across what the functions of the two hemispheres are. And I'll give you an example of what the functions are. And we've been talking about birds today, so another quote about birds. As I said before, the left hemisphere is about focusing and detail. And he said there's a need to focus attention narrowly and with precision as a bird. For example, it needs to focus on a grain of corn that it must eat in order to pick it out from, say, a piece of grit nearby. At the same time, there's a need for open attention, as wide as possible, to guard against a possible predator. That requires some doing. Like particularly a bad case of trying to rub your tummy and pat your head at the same time. So the way the bird does this, the left, one of the eyes, I've got it here I think, if you are a bird, you solve the conundrum how to eat and stay alive by employing different strategies with either eye. The right eye connects to the left hemisphere for getting and feeding, and the left eye, the right hemisphere, that's for vigilant awareness, so to do two things at the same time. So that's the two hemispheres, but the thing is, the way they integrate, the way they work together. The right hemisphere is looking outward at the complex, the outward looking, and the left hemisphere. So the information goes from the right hemisphere to the left hemisphere, and that should go back through to the right hemisphere to process that. But sometimes one hemisphere predominates over another, and this is the problem, really. I'll read here what somebody said here. Some very subtle research by David McNeill, amongst others, confirms that thought originates in the right hemisphere, is processed for expression in speech by the left hemisphere, and the meaning integrated again by the right, which alone understands the overall meaning of a complex utterance, taking everything into account. I've got a quote here, why this book is called The Emissary, The Master and the Emissary. And the author, Ian McGilchrist, used this story. There was once a wise spiritual master who was the ruler of a small but prosperous domain, and was known for his selfless devotion to his people. As his people flourished and grew in number, the bounds of this small domain spread, and with it the need to trust implicitly the emissaries he sent out to ensure the safety of his ever more distant parts. It was not just that it was impossible for him to personally to order all that needs to be dealt with. As he wisely saw, he needs to keep his distance from and remain ignorant of such concerns. And so he nurtured and trained carefully his emissaries in order that they could be trusted. Eventually, however, his cleverest and most ambitious vizier, the one he most trusted to do his work, began to see himself as the master and used his position to advance his own wealth and influence. He saw his master's temperance and forbearance as weakness, not wisdom, and on his missions on the master's behalf adopted his mantle as his own. The emissary became contemptuous of his master, and so it came about that the master was usurped. The people were duped, the domain became a tyranny, and eventually it collapsed in ruins. He's likening the master is the right hemisphere and the emissary as a left hemisphere. And what has happened is that the left hemisphere, the one that looks at detail and not the whole picture, has taken over. And this is what he sees through history of what has eventually happened. The left hemisphere becoming more predominant than the right hemisphere. The second half of the book, what is called How the Brain Has Shaped Our World. And So it goes through the history there, going from the Renaissance and the Reformation, to show how the hemispheres act together. I think I want to mention that he says at the end, if I am right that the story of the Western world is one of increasing left hemisphere domination, we would not expect insight to be the key note. Instead, we would expect a sort of unconcerned optimism, the sleepwalker whistling a happy tune as it ambles towards the abyss. And this is what he's concerned about, that the left hemisphere being too predominant. Obviously, do the two hemispheres work together, but one's over more powerful than the other one. It just have a disturbance, really. I have to say at the end, to check on some of this stuff, because I haven't read it for a while, I went on the internet, and there are YouTube interviews with the author of this book, and it's worthwhile doing that as well, really. Also, a film's come out called The Divided Brain, I believe, and two of the contributors to that are Rowan Williams, and the other one is John Cleese, amongst others. So, must I say, when I finished reading the book, I was more aware of left hemisphere operations going on myself and in the outside world, really. So it's a bit disturbing as well when I did that. Thank you.
So it's not a published one, but I just picked it up on the way out. I should bring something, and it's about words. It's called Transcendental Hydrology. And I've read this poem, so I just wanted to read it out. So this is an opportunity. So it starts here, spelt H-E-A-R. Here, at Wessenden Head, the windrush over ears, inching trickle of rills or unchanneled waters, a creeping film under grass, the uncertain trudge up, wrong turns on trackless heath, ankles rolling, sinking, intent on the ascent. Space opened out, inward, not a voice carrying, so that topping the hill, the bulk and shape of the earth massed across the valley vaults over the river. Echoes word-swept reaches high in back of the mind, fissured from the first urge, heights of which thoughts flow. Pushed up against their brows, precipitate words cloud, language chatters down, baffled by slopes like monumental pages. Dislocute patter drips in stagnant pools, soaked up or utter reams run off. Love's stone-cold shoulder babbling books into word falls. All syllables percolate down eventually, sifted and streamlined to establish discourse. Nothing I say can solve the peaks that structure speech, each meaning sentence straightened by the psyche's elemental prospects. Escarpments undissolved by biblical spates of script. Wait, we have time. The even friction of air flutes incessant breezes upon open ear canals. The stoic slopes gesture their stupendous patience. The water nags the banks with relentless ardour into ordered alluvium, and if the merest flakes of mineral deliquescence with each drop, the mountain will move nevertheless. Wait. Let words work as weather. Not one of mine or yours or many will reveal the forbidding inclines, canalising eloquence, but the murmuration of all groping voices echoing down eons will slowly lick away at what we cannot say. Patient observation has excavated laws governing fluid flow and landform creation, yet the imperatives guiding courses of thought are not catalogued, Perhaps we'll never wholly dissolve into dialogue. For now we bow under the cliffs with the first folk, tongues working, parched throats grateful for the springing, whether words or water. Yeah. And that's by Chris Taylor, who happens to be our son.
With life being as it has been for a while, this kind of reading is kind of escapism. I've got two, and the first one I'll tell you about is called the Zimmerman Telegram. Has anybody read it? Mm-hmm. It's history. It's about the beginning of the war. I'll just read and tell you what they say about it. The star says, nothing can stop an enemy from picking up wireless messages out of the free air. Nothing did. In England, Room 40 was born. In January 1917, with the First World War locked in terrible stalemate and America still neutral, German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann gambled the future of the conflict on a single telegram. But this telegram was intercepted and decoded in Whitehall's legendary Room 40. And Zimmermann's audacious scheme for world domination was exposed, bringing America into the war and changing the course of history. The story of how this happened and the incalculable consequences were thrillingly told in Barbara Tuchman's brilliant exploration. It is a thriller. I love thrillers. But most of us can remember probably that time and how really serious and awful the whole thing was. And what I learned in this I've never heard of before, and it was about how America, Japan and Mexico particularly, was hugely involved in this. And the downside of it is that he's great on giving you a huge number of names, which I have to say I rather opted out of. But it was a very exciting book and very interesting from that period of time. And I can really recommend it as a good read. It won the Pulitzer Prize. So that was one. And the other one is a novel. Strangely, about that same time of history too. This one is called Ali and Nino, and it's attributed to a man called Kurban Said. The book is introduced by Paul Ferro. The Sunday Times said its beauty and power and the sheer pleasure that it gives are indestructible. And I just loved it. It really is just such a lovely, lovely, tender story. Poignant and beautiful, alive with a vividly unique vision of colliding cultures and enduring love. Annie Khan and Nino Kipiani lived in the cosmopolitan, oil-rich capital of Azerbaijan, which, at the beginning of the 20th century, is a melting pot of different cultures. Ali is a Muslim, with his ancestors' passion for the desert, and Nino is a Christian Georgian girl with sophisticated, European ways. Despite their differences, the two have loved each other since childhood, and Ali is determined that they will marry. Nino, as soon as she leaves school, but there is not only the obstacle of their different religions and parental concept to overcome. The First World War breaks out as the Russians withdraw. The Turks advance, and Ali and Nino find themselves swept up in Azerbaijan's fight for independence. There's a lot in this little book, and I just love it. I don't think I ever want to be parted from it, because it's such a lovely, lovely, tender story of these two young people who were caught up in this conflict of cultures and how they deal with it. They both had very enlightened parents who were happy to help them, but nevertheless they were caught up in this state and it was very difficult for them. So that's what the story is about, and I recommend it. That's it.
I'm going to tell you Upanishads. It's a short one. The Upanishads are very important in Indian philosophy, originally written in Sanskrit. And the thing to think about is the language of Sanskrit is full of lots of different meanings. Each word, or lots of words anyway, have many more meanings than we have in English for separate words. So it's not, in a sense, it's not a linear language. It's one that's three-dimensional, just parts of the language. But of course, if you translate it into English, different translators are putting it into an English narrative very often, so it alters it. This translation of this book, the 10 principal Upanishads, put into English by Sri Purohit Swami and W.E. Yates. So this one is called the Aitareya Upanishad, which is at the feet of Master Aitareya. And each Upanishad begins with a little sort of invocation, so I shall read that as well. May God be revealed, speech merge in mind, mind merge in speech. May they bring me the Vedas. May I ponder over that knowledge day and night. May I never forget it. Truth shall be on my lips, and truth in my thoughts. May truth protect me, protect my teacher, protect us both. May peace and peace and peace be everywhere. There was in the beginning one sole self, no I winged. He thought, shall I create territories? He created territories, that of the first water, that of light, that of earth, that of water. Heaven and beyond heaven is that of the first water. Sky is that of light. This mortal territory is that of earth. Under earth is that of water. He thought again. The territories are there. Let me create their rulers. Out of water he lifted an egg. He warmed it. And because of his warmth, a being with a mouth appeared through a crack, for his own form lay within it. From the mouth came speech, from speech fire. A nose appeared. From its nostrils came breath, from breath air. The eyes appeared, from the eyes came sight, from sight the sun. The ears appeared, from the ears came hearing, from hearing the four quarters. The skin appeared, from the skin came hair, from hair vegetation. The heart appeared, from the heart came the mind, from the mind came the moon. The navel appeared, from the navel came the downward breath, aparna, from aparna, death. Sex appeared, from sex came seed, from seed water. When these gods were created, they went back into the waters. Then he endowed that being with hunger and thirst. Then the gods said, give us some place where we can live and eat. He created a bull out of the waters. They said, no, it's not sufficient. He created a horse. They said, no, it is not sufficient. He created a man. They said, you have done well. Because they were satisfied, a man is the chief of creatures. He said to the gods, take your places. Fire in the character of speech entered the mouth. Air in the character of scent entered the nose. Sun in the character of sight entered the eyes. Four quarters in the character of hearing entered the ears. Vegetation in the character of hair entered the skin. Moon is the character of mind, moon in the character of mind entered the heart. Death in the character of aparna entered the navel. Water in the character of seed entered the loins. Hunger and Thirst said, where is our place? He said, take your place beside all the gods. I have made you the partners of all. To whatever God man makes oblation, hunger and thirst shall partake. He thought, here are the territories and their rulers. I will create food. He meditated on water, and from the heat of meditation came an image. That image is food. Food fled from man. Man tried to grasp it with speech, but failed. Had he succeeded to talk about it, had been satisfaction enough. He tried to grasp it with breath, but failed. Had he succeeded to inhale it, had been satisfaction enough. He tried to grasp it with his eyes, but failed. Had he succeeded to look upon it, had been satisfaction enough. He tried to grasp it with his ears, but failed. Had he succeeded to hear it, had been satisfaction enough. He tried to grasp it with his skin, but failed. Had he succeeded to touch it, had been satisfaction enough. Tried to grasp it with his mind, but failed. Had he succeeded, thinking of it would have been satisfaction enough. He tried to grasp it with a downward breath, apana, and succeeded. Apana alone receives food. Apana lives on food. God thought, can they live without me? How shall I enter the body? He knew that even if tongue spoke, breath breathed, eyes saw, ears heard, skin touched, mind thought, apana drew in, sex threw out, they would not know him. He opened the suture of the skull, entered through the gate which is called the gate of joy. He found 3 places in the body where he could live, 3 conditions where he could move, waking, dreaming, sleeping. He entered the body, named its various parts, wondered if there could be anything there not himself, rejoiced to find there was nothing but himself. Hence he is known by the name Idandra, he that sees, or it is shortened into Indra, but even the gods are affectionate. First he becomes the seed of a man, which is light, gathered from all the limbs of the body. Man nourishes himself within himself as seed. When he ejects that seed into a woman, he himself is born. That is his first incarnation. The seed merges in the woman's body. Because it becomes her body, it does not harm her. She nourishes the self of the man within herself. Protector, for she is protecting the seed. Before and after the birth of the child, man blesses the child, blessing himself. Man lives in this child. That is his second incarnation. The son, being the father over again, carries the traditions of the family, and the father, having completed his fate, exhausted his years, dies and is born again. That is his third incarnation. Sage Wamadeva said, when lying in the womb I understood how the gods worked. They put me into that iron-gated, 100-gated prison, but I fled quickly. I fled like a hawk. Sage Wamadeva broke out of the body, did all that he desired, attained the kingdom of heaven, became immortal. Yes, became immortal. On whom should we meditate as the self? Which of the two is he? Is he that by which we see, hear, speak, smell, separate the sweet from the sour? Or is he that other, living in the mind or in the intellect as imagination, discrimination, knowledge, continuity, intuition, conviction, contemplation, will, emotion, memory, desire, resolution, being, living, loving, longing, all names for the one intelligence? He is spirit, creator, God, all gods, earth, air, water, fire, wind, constituents of life, all greater and lesser combinations, seminal, egg-born, womb-born, sweat-born, soil-born, horses, cows, men, elephants, birds, everything that breathes, movable, immovable, all founded upon, all moved by the one intelligence. Intelligence is spirit. Sajwamadeva, with this knowledge, did all that he desired, left his world for heaven, became immortal, became immortal.
been quite a range of books this afternoon. There's been some incredible ones. And particularly enjoyed the Master and His Emissary, and Alan's analysis of it was very good indeed. That's a very difficult book. I think Andrew recommended it to me about 6 or 7 years ago, and I've read it 3 times since then, and it is a very comprehensive book, but that was a very good analysis of it. This is a very simple book, and a very direct book. It's by a man called Rupert Sheldrake, and some of you will know of him. He gave a very good lecture here a few years ago, and he's still very powerful in the area of, shall we say, rationalising science. As a scientist himself, he tends to explore and reinterpret some of the statements which are made scientifically. He has a book out called The Science Delusion, about the fact of the way it feels it's describing the world, and he reinterprets a lot of the information and says, no, what it's actually talking about is a more satisfying and, if you like, a more comprehensive view, which certainly is more in keeping with Eugene's ideas. This is called Science and Spiritual Practices, and although it looks like a thick book, it isn't actually, and it's very easy to read. There's another book coming out. This came out about a year ago. There's another one coming out just at this moment, and they're all to do with spiritual practices which can help you to realise in yourself who you are. So it follows the whole theme of today, really. And in this book, he analyses meditation and the nature of what the mind is, the flow of gratitude, which is another practice which he talks about, reconnecting with the more than human world, that means the animal world, and then the next one is relating to plants in this world of ours. Then the 5th chapter is rituals and the presence of the past, and how we are strengthened by gathering from ritual activities, and particularly ones which are built into our cultures and religions. 6 is chanting, singing, and the power of music. 7 is pilgrimages and holy places. He discusses pilgrimages and their values through all different cultures, but he also comes down to the simple one of when you're walking towards a cathedral, before you go in, walk around it, or get off the bus a mile away and walk towards it, because even a small pilgrimage like that gives a certain resonance to the building you're going to. And that really connected to me, because a few years ago I was sent on a course into Leicester, and approaching it, we saw the cathedral and actually went into it, and that was an extremely beautiful experience. And I think if you approach London, you can see it from about 10 miles away. The actual cathedral dominates the city. It's built on such a vantage point. So as you approach that one, it's really powerful. And then to go into the thing is amazing. And lastly, conclusions, spiritual practices in a secular age. So he goes through 7 different aspects, or if you like, religious practices. And what I thought I'd do, I'd just read some of the conclusions that he comes towards. He talks a lot about the fact that religion seems to be diminishing in the world. There are a few places like Russia where apparently religious observance is growing quite rapidly, and of course it was suppressed quite violently for a long time, and it's bouncing back. But in most places, religious observance is dropping, in all forms of religion, including Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. And what he suggests here is that there is very strong scientific evidence that a lot of these practices are deeply helpful to human beings. And he goes through with the statistics, which I'll leave you to find if you're interested in that aspect of it. But let's see if I can capture it here in what he says. Most people who've given up their ancestral faiths have not done so to escape guilt or even conflict. Many convert to a non-religious lifestyle, not for negative reasons, but for positive reasons. They want to align themselves with progress, reason, and science. But what science says is when they do that, when they do abandon their ancestral religion, they usually cease to take part in a whole series of practices that their ancestors took for granted. And these are deeply satisfying to human beings. It doesn't number them, but it gives a list. Giving thanks as a community and as a family. Being part of a community that sings together. He goes on a lot about singing. Praying. Accepting death as a transition and not as the end. Going through rites of passage like baptism, confirmation and marriage. Having traditional religious funerals. Acknowledging ancestors. Celebrating festivals that give structure to the passage of time throughout the year and throughout life. Connecting with places which are sacred. Participating in rituals that give a sense of collective identity and continuity. Being encouraged to help other people. Being part of a larger story that helps give meaning to individual lives. And finally, feeling a connection to a spiritual reality that transcends all space and time. So that's what the book is directed towards. I recommend it to you because it is a lovely book to read. I read sort of a chapter a night, and each one of them was really uplifting. One of the interesting statistics and science that he gives are throughout the book, but one which really caught me was simply just giving gratitude and deliberately making yourself give thanks. And he recounts the science which went on in the 60s and 70s, where they found that if people were sat and wrote down for, I think it was a period of an hour, things that had happened in the previous week that really irritated them, they could test how depressed they were with heart rate, blood rate, etc., and their own responses to questions they were asked afterwards. And if they wrote about the things that they were grateful for in the week before, that this had an effect again in their responses, their answers, and in their blood flow, etc., their heart rate, etc. But they also found that one thing was extremely powerful. If they wrote a letter to thank somebody who'd helped them at some point in their life, and then actually went to the person and read them the letter, the physical effects of that process were still with them 2 months afterwards. Lowered heart rate, the stimulation of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the calming nervous system, said it was quite profound. So it's a very interesting book. Most of the things people here, I'm sure, do, of course, but to give the backup for it, the scientific backup for it, is really revealing. And he writes it in a humorous way. He pulls these things together very well indeed. And I'm looking forward to getting his next book, which is out at the moment, but it hasn't got to my cheap end of the market yet, but it will do. So that's Science and Spiritual Practices by Rupert Sheldrake.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, everybody. We could go on.
Possibly do one more? Could I possibly
very quickly? Yes, because we're already 5:15. So
is that
is
right?
it going to be like a couple of minutes?
Yeah, I won't go on and on. This is it came out about 2 or 3 weeks ago by an author, my hugely called John Higgs.
It's called The Future Starts Here. Adventures in the 21st Century. He previously wrote a book on the 20th century, which is brilliant. He's been described as a cognitive historian, which I'm not quite sure what that is, but it's very interesting. So he talks about the usual kind of things you'd expect, like what technology is going to do, this, that and the other. But there's two aspects of this that really interest me. One is he talks about Generation Z, which is, we hear a lot about millennials, but actually millennials are kind of grown-ups now. The next generation, the generation that are under about 23, are known as Generation Z or Generation Snowflake. And there is a lot of evidence that they behave in radically different ways from the people who come before. They're people who've grown up with mobile phones and with social media for all of their lives. And they behave in a much more communal, considerate, almost sort of group-think kind of way. And he draws a lot of kind of really interesting stuff from that. And the other thing that he says is, when we imagine the future, now, we almost invariably imagine dystopia. He said he can't find a major Hollywood movie since the late 1980s that has an optimistic vision of the future. And the thing about visions of the future, you can only create the future that you can imagine. So what this is doing for our future is terrible. So he says you need to have optimism, because otherwise you can't build a better future. He came up with the phrase, pessimism is for lightweight. Pessimism is easy, it's the easy way out. Like, but you have to be optimistic. It's hard work being optimistic, but you have to. Yeah, I could go on. It's a really great book. It's just come out. The Future Starts Here, which I think is.
Oh, that's nice.
Okay, thank you all so much, and please, if you haven't written your books down on the sheet at the back, if you can email them in or write them on the way out, please. Thank you so much.